everyone. I am Dr. Jeremiah Davis, and I am honored to welcome you all to our second Forrester Lecture of the school year. The Forrester Lecture Series provides Huntington University the opportunity to invite accomplished scholars and professionals in their fields to discuss their work within a community dedicated to Christ's scholarship and service. And tonight's speaker, in addition to being an accomplished scholar, is also an alumnus of Huntington. But before I introduce our speaker, I invite you all to join me in prayer. Please bow your heads. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to come together as a community. We thank you for the tremendous weather and for institutions like HU, where we can join in growing in our faith. But most of all, we thank you for the gift of your beloved Son, Jesus Christ, he who is truly the light of the world. Through the light of Christ, we can better see and appreciate the countless blessings you have bestowed upon us, the gifts of the natural world, but also the gift of each other. We pray that your word continues to be a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. And it is on this path that we come together tonight to learn more about each other and ourselves as parts of your creation. We pray that you bless Dr. Devers as she shares her work with our community, and bless the audience, granting us ears to hear and minds to appreciate what we learn this evening. Lord, we pray for these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right. Dr. Aaron Devers is a professor of psychology at Indiana Wesleyan University and, as mentioned earlier, a graduate of Huntington University. She identifies strongly as a teacher scholar and explores innovative ways to engage her classes and enhance learning. She teaches social psychology, research methods, statistics, and general psychology. As mentioned, a social psychologist, Dr. Devers' work explores the way our physical states influence our psychological states, such as how a physical touch can reduce prejudice or how hot temperatures might influence perceptions of physical attractiveness. She is also a book writer and the author of The Unbiased Self, The Psychology of Overcoming Cognitive Bias. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Aaron Devers.
All right. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much. This is a great honor for me to get to be here, especially under the Forrester Lecture. I heard that you had an actual Forrester give the most recent lecture. I know nothing about forestry, but I do think I might be one of the oldest foresters here. And the reason why I'm foresters here is because I became a forester as an infant. Many of you may know my mother, Dr. Cindy Sturry, was a professor here. And so I grew up on this campus. My leaf collection in second grade came from trees on this campus. I exposed Dr. Mary Ruthie to chicken pox. So I was a forester way before I moved into Hardy Hall at the turn of the century. So I've been part of this community for a very long time. And so part of what you're going to hear tonight comes from my experience in your community. And so I would love this to be a love letter to you, but especially to those of you who were here at the turn of the century and you know who you are, including, and he's probably not here, but may see this recording someday, Blair Dowden, who is the president, who taught me what it might mean to think Christianly, to Dr. Steve Lee, who is here, to Dr. Wayne Priest, who taught me what it meant to think psychologically and to think integratively, and to Dr. Mike Rowley, who taught me how to publicly speak. So here we are. So let's get into it. So this title, we'll go back one more, The Unbiased Self. Wow. I want to at least start by mentioning the reason it's called a short journey to more holy thinking is not because we will achieve holy thinking by the end of the talk, but because this talk will be short. Okay. The process of holiness will be long. But let's start at the beginning. So if I were writing a novel, as I might have learned how to do in Dr. Todd Martin's class, I would have started with what's the problem, what's the exposition, what's going on at the beginning. And the problem for us is that bias is inevitable. Because if you were to think about having all of the information would be what you would need to be unbiased. And none of us has all the information. God will be unbiased. We will not. So this is the doorway into the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles. And you can see On one side, you can walk in through the prejudice door, and you can try to walk in through the unprejudiced door. Unfortunately, that door is locked, and you might also notice the only one that has an exit is the one that says prejudiced. So if we're all stuck going through this door, is this what bias means? Does it mean that we're all prejudiced? And so when you hear the word bias, you might think of these categories. So things like having to do with height or gender or race. And is this bias? Well, this is part of bias. But like any professor you've ever had, I need to give you what definition I'm working from. And here's the definition. So what is bias? Bias is anything that prevents us from seeing the world accurately. And so by that definition, there's so much, right? So much. So much bigger than the categories that we're using that might contribute to bias. It's anything that's preventing us from seeing the world accurately. So it's a lot. So the question you might want to ask is, wow, if bias is inevitable, where does it come from? Is there a way to reduce it? So I give two explanations for where bias comes from, and we're gonna unpack them just a little bit. So the first one is that we want to be right. And so this doesn't mean that we want to learn or that we want to, that we're trying to get it right. It means that we want to be right. And that's a very different state. It means I want to be proving that I'm right. I want to be able to get to a quick answer that says, this is it. And that's a very different thing than what we're going to try to do tonight. The second cause of bias is that we want to feel good about ourselves. So we're going to unpack where these two things come from. But in my social psych class, we have a mantra. And it's almost like a callback, like we're at church. And I say, we have two basic human motives, and I say, we want to be, and they say, right. And I say, we want to be, and then they say, feel good about ourselves. These two basic human motives. And we repeat this because it does such a good job explaining human behavior. Okay, so what do I mean when I say that? So we've got to unpack that just a little bit. So in order to do that, I need you to use your imagination, and I want you to enter into your mind into this cognitive space. So you've got your brain, and then you've got cognition. And so I want you to imagine that cognition is emanating from this room. So this room is beautiful. It's very well organized. So for people who love organization, this is just, it could be from the Container Store. They spared no expense at organizing things. And so that's where we're going to say that's where your cognition is. And so you've got these file folders that you've collected over the course of your life. And in these file folders, you've put all your experiences and information. So if I were to ask you a question like, what do you think about immigration? You would go to your immigration file folder, you'd open it up, and then you'd give me this beautifully detailed opinion. And you'd think to yourself, wow, I know a lot. Unfortunately, when we do this, when we engage in our beautifully curated room, we don't have everything. So especially on topics like as complicated as immigration, we may fail to realize that, wow, in order to know everything that might be necessary to give an accurate answer about immigration, we probably don't have it. But we fail to see that because we're in this beautifully curated room. And so our minds are beautifully curated and organized, but they're incomplete. So the first barrier that I'm up against when I talk about bias is that it doesn't feel biased, it feels beautiful. So I'm going to give you a similar task that some students at Stanford received, and I want you to see how you answer. So if I were to say there are a whole collection of biases, and there are, and one of them is here on the screen. It says, psychologists claim that we seek out, remember, and interpret information that confirms what we already believe. So I want you to see, so these Stanford students were asked, to what extent do you show this tendency? And so they gave their answer. And then they were asked, to what extent do you believe Americans show this tendency? And then they recorded their answer. And I don't think, Stanford students might be a little bit more arrogant than us, but I don't think a lot more. And here's how those results played out. We understand bias, and we think other people are biased, but us, I'm great. Other people, bias is a problem for other people. I'm seeing the world clearly. And so this is what psychologists have identified as the bias blind spot. So if you think about what blind spot means, you might think about your car. And so you can easily correct this blind spot, right? Now cars are fancy and they kind of put a little light on the rear views for you to tell you if there's something in your blind spot. But we used to just turn our heads to look, and you could see in that blind spot. Your eye actually has a blind spot, but your mind really quickly corrects for that blind spot where the optic nerve is located. The blind spot that I'm up against is one that Jesus talks about, and this is the most uncomfortable picture of this that I could find on the internet. You can't see your own bias because you've got a giant log in your eye. So how do you remove that? And that's what I'm up against when I talk about bias, because we're operating in this beautifully curated room, which doesn't make us feel biased. And we think other people are biased. When I talk about bias, people are like, "Oh, I see that. That's true for other people." But for me, I'm pretty good at this. And so interestingly, they tested whether or not if you're cognitively sophisticated. They thought maybe some people don't have this blind spot. So they tested cognitive sophistication using like SAT scores, and then they have this really complicated test where you solve these puzzles. And it turns out that in fact, these cognitively sophisticated people had bigger blind spots than the unsophisticated ones. And so it really speaks to that idea of like, man, we all need Jesus, right? Nobody's gonna take this plank out by themselves. We all have it. So if this is where the problem of bias is, where does it come from? Wanting to be right is the first one. And so because we wanna be right, when we encounter information in the world, we act like lawyers. And so my dad is a lawyer, so it's always a little bit offensive that I say this. But lawyers, right, they're not examining all the evidence to try and arrive at a conclusion. The conclusion came first. And so when we want to be right, we've already kind of gotten in our minds where we're going, and we're collecting information to get us to that place that we've really already gotten to. And that's what confirmation bias is, which is that first one that I had you consider. But there are a lot of biases that are connected to wanting to be right. So I have so much I want to say, and you might think, oh wow, she's talking so fast, how could there be more? But I'm not going to go through all of these unless you would want to talk about them at the end if someone has a question. Although the funniest one, the Kruger-Dunning effect, is where the people that you don't know what you don't know, and so people who don't know something are actually the most confident that they know stuff. And so it's a real sign of knowledge when you can know what you don't know and understand the limits of your knowledge. And so that's a really funny finding called the Kruger-Dunning effect. Okay, so one reason that we're biased is because we're filtering all of our information with this desire to be right, and we've reached our conclusion too soon so that we can be right. The second source of bias is that we want to feel good about ourselves. And so that beautiful room, that beautifully curated room with all the files, the information is getting filtered to make us feel good about ourselves, to paint us in the best possible light. This is also referred to as a psychological immune system. So it's actually good, right? It's your way of kind of your body bouncing back when things get hard. And so there are a lot of cute effects that have to do with this as well. But you can imagine this doesn't lead to accuracy either, because when we want to feel good about ourselves, we process information as if we were politicians. We put the spin on it that makes us look the absolute best. And so these I refer to as quick and dirty ways to feel better. And I'm not against them. I think they're a quick shot of sugar when you're not feeling good about yourself. You can just say, oh, well, I'm above average. And in fact, most people think they're above average, more than average. So you can see here, over 80% of people think they're above average in getting along with others. It's even more than 80% of people who think they're more moral than others. And even in terms of driving, it's definitely more than 70% of people think they're above average at driving. So you can always tell yourself that, and it might make you feel better. My favorite of the quick and dirty ways to feel better is a downward social comparison. And so you've probably done this one. You're not having a great day, and you say, well, it could have been worse. At least I'm not experiencing what that person is. And so these are, I even snap when I do them, because we do them almost automatically, and they make us feel better. But like a shot of sugar when you're hungry, it's not going to last long enough, and it's not very stable. So that was the problem. And I covered it 15 minutes. All right, good. So where's the climax? So what's the most, if I'm going to tell you what's the most important, most exciting part of this talk. So here we are, the climax. We can reduce bias. So you're not totally surprised because I told you we were going to become less biased on a short holy journey. But the climax is reducing bias is facilitated by a secure identity. So Christians, as a group, most people don't think about us as being less biased. If anything, most people think we're more biased. That's actually part of our stereotype. But in fact, I'm making a counterintuitive argument that says Christians actually have the opportunity to be less biased. And it's because we have a way to make our identities secure. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time unpacking how do you get there. So I'm going to talk about two theories of where identity of identity and the self and where it comes from. And the first one has to do with your self-concept. So we could talk about your self-concept as being your available self-concept. And so imagine if your mind is a hard drive. I know we were doing the file folders, but now we're going, imagine that it's a hard drive. It's everything on the hard drive, the available self-concept. But what we're actually activating on a day-to-day basis, what we're working with most of the time is the working self-concept. It's what's currently available. And so that is what's on your desktop. It's the tabs that you have open on your computer. That's what you're currently working with. And so the file folders that are most important to us, we open them all the time. And those become the most important pieces of our self-concept. So this is what Hazel Marcus refers to as self-schematicity. The things that you're schematic for are the things that you think about relative to yourself all the time. So I'm going to give you some examples, and I really hope that you're going to make this personal and think about what your folders are. So this is the point in the story where I reference my husband. So my husband is schematic for athleticism. So he was a gymnast in college, and he loves working out, thinks about this as part of his identity. And so when you're schematic for something, you think about it regularly, you engage in behaviors that are related to it, and as a consequence of that schematicity, you also judge other people on that dimension. So we were walking inside of a mall, and one of our friends was about 100 yards away, pretty far. Or I don't even know how far, far, maybe not 100 yards, but far. And we saw him from the back. And my husband said, "Is that our friend Stuart? I recognize his lats." So I'm like, okay, wow. Impressive that you might be able to identify Stuart, but what are lats? And he's like, well, it's this part of your arm. Like, everyone knows that, right? And when you're schematic for things, you judge things other people don't. I am aschematic for athleticism, which means I don't judge other people's athleticism, and I could not identify whose lats are looking good and whose are not. So the things you're schematic for turn out to take up your time, and then they also impact how you judge other people. So that story about athleticism feels very innocuous, but you can imagine that other things people are schematic for might be more dangerous. So many women and men are schematic for body, thinking about their looks and how attractiveness, that's right. So you can imagine if you might be someone who's suffering from an eating disorder, you're thinking about your body image all the time. It's a schema that you've got habitually open. And then not only are you judging yourself very harshly, you're probably judging all the people around you very harshly. So when I realized this, that what you're schematic for, not only is it taking up a lot of your time and attention and influencing your identity, it's impacting how you judge other people. I really took a moment to think about what my file folders are. So I'm going to share what some of mine are, because I told you I was aschematic for those. I realized that, especially as a professor, if I'm constantly assessing people's academic ability, I'm starting to judge them based on this. And I also am schematic for interesting. I realized that I felt frequently judged about how interesting I am, and that I started judging other people as being interesting. One of my friends said to me, "I feel like when I hang out with you, I have to put on a big show." And so then I realized, man, when we stand before God, will interesting matter? Will intelligence matter? Will athleticism matter? Will how attractive I am matter? Probably not. And so I don't want to judge me that way, and I definitely don't want to judge other people that way. So what I invest my identity in, what schemas I open, are really important. So we're going to come back to this, but I want you to consider that those identities, those schemas, those file folders, the things that you're frequently opening, they have a consequence, not just for you, but for everybody else that you're surrounding yourself with. And you want to be careful about what those schemas are so that you can be thinking about things that are really important. The second theory also has to do with how we think about our identity, is called self-complexity theory. And so this is kind of how many file folders do you have? So if you were to look in my hard drive, I have a lot of file folders, lots of them. I want to organize into all kinds of things, right? Some people have just a few file folders. So Patricia Linville argues that having fewer file folders is dangerous. It's actually better to have lots of file folders. And the reason why she would argue that lots of file folders is really good is because if you fail in one of your file folders, then you have a lot more file folders to fall back on. And so it would make failure less dangerous. This is called the buffering hypothesis. Okay, so she would say if you lost your job, like in the one on the left, and you only had 2 file folders, home and job, losing your job would feel really terrible. But on the right, if you lost your job and you had a lot of other file folders, you would feel better. So that makes sense, but all of those file folders that I've put up on the screen are identities at which you could fail. So your spouse could divorce you, your church could excommunicate you, your parents could stop speaking to you or die, your friends could no longer communicate with you, your sister could stop speaking to you also. All those are also places where you could fail, right? Unlikely, but possible, right? And so I wanted to consider, would self-complexity matter if our identities were ones at which you can't fail? And what are those identities at which you can't fail? And so this is what leads me to the extra climax of the climax, which is these are the 2 that I landed on. These are the 2 file folders that I would encourage you to build identity into. And the first one is that we're a child of God. There's nothing that you could do to change that identity, although I guess I am from a Wesleyan school and we have some differences in theology surrounding this question, but I'm not a theologian. I'm always going to be a child of God. There's nothing, no height nor depth, nothing's going to separate me from the love of God. I'm a child of God. And there's not a thing that I could do that would change that identity. That identity is secure. And if I'm investing in that identity, if I'm opening that file folder all the time, that's the identity in the file folder that I bring to the people that I encounter. So when I see them, I don't see how attractive are they. I'm not trying to see how intelligent are they. I'm trying to see, oh my gosh, here I am standing before a beloved child of God. The second one, I'm a sinner saved by grace. And you might think, why do you need this second one? I think you need the second one to account for all the bad stuff that's happening and all the bad stuff that we do, so that I can say, I'm a beloved child of God. It's also normative that I'm going to fail because I'm a sinner. I'm a sinner who's saved by grace, but I'm still a sinner. And so holding those 2 identities, and there's nothing that's going to change that identity for me either, right? So holding these 2 secure identities, if these are the file folders that I'm encountering, so when I see someone messing up, or if I'm messing up, I can be like, oh, they're still a sinner too. They're also a sinner saved by grace. That those 2 ways of judging people and judging myself become the most prominent. Okay, so that being the climax, I'm going to make a recommendation that's a little bit different, and this is based on this idea of what you should do before you get out of bed in the morning. So before you get out of bed in the morning, if these were the identities that you wanted to hold, and this is the thing that one of the practices that I've been engaging in now for a while, is before you get out of bed to think about God, vastness, omnipotence, omniscience, all bigness, vastness, amazing, right? God. And think about where you rank on those dimensions relative to God. And so that line is to represent the largest distance that there could possibly be. And so when I think about, wow, God, who you are, who I am, so different in terms of on all of these dimensions. And then I think about who I am relative to the people I surround myself with. all of a sudden, people who looked like maybe I was better than them, maybe I was worse than them, all of a sudden we become the same. So much the same. And so if you think about one of the things that our culture does a lot, we like to engage in social comparison, particularly on social media, and we think about who's got a better life than us, who's got a worse life than us, who's holier than us, who's smarter than us, who's prettier than us. Man, I'm not sure any of that stuff's going to matter. I think those differences between you and me and everybody else, compared to the distance between me and God in all these dimensions, the distance between each other is so small. And so I'm going to tell a funny story, because that was kind of serious, but I'm going to tell a funny story because you're probably wondering, why is Bill Gates on the screen? So the person on the left is one of my really good friends. And then the second one, he's not one of my good friends, but wow, wouldn't that be amazing if that were true? Bill Gates. And so my friend on the left, she had an opportunity to pitch for Bill Gates. So she only had a couple minutes. And this was an amazing opportunity for her. And she was one of the early readers on my book. And so she's like, okay, she's in the bathroom before the talk. She's like, I'm going to use some of Aaron's tricks. So here's the trick. She goes in and she's like, okay, God, you are big. I am small. Bill Gates and I are the same. Right? So she goes in, she gives the pitch, and then this story turns out really great. He says, this is good. It makes a lot of sense. And she felt like, oh, that was all I was there for, right? So it's not just for in situations when we're judging other people harshly because we think somehow they're below us. It's also it's an equivocator between the people that we think are above us. And so I had a person who read the book and came up to me and said, here's what I think your book's about. And I'm like, okay, wow, I'm interested to know what you think. And she said, the ground is level at the foot of the cross. Yeah, that's profoundly true to me. And that's what I mean when I say let's engage in this practice. And so setting ourselves up to be accurate about ourselves helps us to be accurate with each other and puts us in a position where we see where God sits relative to us. Okay, so we're good. Okay, all right, so the resolution. So if that's the climax, what do we do with that? Okay, so if having a secure identity sets us up to be less biased, what do we actually do in our daily lives besides this one thing that I'm suggesting you do before you get out of bed? I'm going to give four recommendations, and all of them are things that your community here at Huntington does really well. And so I really want to encourage you, because I think when people hear, these are the things I need to do to be less biased, they think it's about to be hard and it's about to be a really difficult and uncomfortable conversation, and that's not what I'm recommending. I'm recommending things that are really joyful. So here we go. The first one, build habits, not willpower. So when you think about trying to pursue holiness, you might think, oh, wow, and I'm just going to set a bunch of resolutions, and then I'm going to buckle down and use a lot of willpower, and I'm going to beat this, whatever this thing is I'm trying to get better at, I'm just going to do it, and I'm going to put all my energy into it. It turns out that people aren't very good at that for very long. They get tired. It's hard. So instead, habit researchers suggest that we should set habits. And so these habits, we get them early, we get them from our parents, but we can also learn them here in this place. And so for me, it's very fitting to be here in a place where I learned a pattern of worship, a place where you come as a group to worship on a regular basis, 3 times a week, I'm assuming. And so that practice of doing things together, it's much easier to spend time with God when it's just part of your normal routine. And so building those habits. And so having just a routine of what do you do in the morning? And so I have a whole host of things that I do in the morning, and they don't require much thought anymore because your body knows what's the next thing. And so when you think about spiritual disciplines and how you develop them, you could try to be like, oh, I'm just going to make sure I spend a whole hour reading the Bible today. Or you could try to figure out, how do I just build into my life just the habits of spiritual disciplines? So that's simple things like I listen to a meditation app in my car that I put on immediately after I drop my 3rd daughter off at school. And that's just what I know my body and my brain are ready to do that every day. And so just having those built-in ways of forming that connection. So habits, not willpower. And the second one, having an abundance mindset. When people are in positions of scarcity, their thinking gets really limited, gets really narrow, and they make mistakes. So we all know this because it's like being hangry. That's not where you do your best thinking. And in fact, we know that this one's really funny. On planes, when they have a coach section and people have to walk past, or there's a coach section and a first class section and people walk past the first class section in order to get to coach, there are more confrontational incidents. And the argument being that all of a sudden this highlights this position of scarcity and abundance, that some people are in abundance and others might be in scarcity, that highlighting that leads to worse thinking and confrontation. So one of the ways that this shows up here at Huntington and showed up for me was that my professors met me with an abundance mindset. With an abundance mindset of their time, with an abundance mindset of their energy. And so not only were they showing up for their classes, but Dr. Martinen, he was new to Huntington when I was here, but came with me on a missions trip for spring break. They traveled. Joanne Miller gave me the keys to the Joe Mertz van. I got to go to Ecuador with a group. People like Martha Smith and Ann McFerrin were people who gave me their time. I never felt like I was imposing on anyone. And now, as a person who sits in their position, I realize that it would be hard to not feel a sense of scarcity, but they didn't. They approached me with what felt like abundance. And so I want to offer that kind of abundance to the people that I approach. And so we think better. It's much more joyful. And I think it's consistent, where God says, I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. The idea that we're tapping into abundance is built into the Christian story. The third one is to pursue awe. So first one, try habits, not willpower. The second one, have an abundance mindset. The third one, pursuing awe. And what awe looks like is vastness and sanctity. And so my very first trip out of the country happened when I was a student here, and I got to go to Greece and walk in the footsteps of Paul with the expert advice of Dr. Mark Fairchild. And it was just a mind-expanding experience to see parts of the world. I also got to spend a semester at Oxford while I was here, and I got to see all of these different places and people. But I also did things while I was just here on campus. I had an inflatable boat that I took out to Lake Snowtip at night. I'm not sure who knew I did that, but I did that. If you were my friend, you might have gotten to go. But I think when you think about awe, it's joy. It's things that just feel beautiful. One of my favorite hymns was one that was also a favorite of my grandmother. And I'm going to read to you the lyrics because they're so amazing. And if you know this hymn, it'll mean a little bit more to you. But it says, could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the sky of parchment made, were every stalk on earth a quill, and every man a scribe by trade, to write the love of God would drain the ocean dry, nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky. So awe comes from this vastness. And so people who have been to space actually experience this. It broadens, and what happens is that it increases our love of humanity. It shifts the rating of the severity of our problems. And so if we can take the focus off the self and experience awe, people actually draw pictures of the self smaller under conditions of awe than they do under normal conditions. When the self becomes smaller, the world and everybody else becomes bigger, and that's a more accurate place as well. And then finally, the last recommendation I'm going to make is just built into the community here, spending time with good thinkers. I'm going to start with a slightly funny story about this, though. One of the ways to be a good thinker is to add probabilities to your decisions. So when I was in my 20s, one of my good friends was about to get married, and her husband came up to me and he said, I'm about 80-20 on marrying your friend. And my 20-something self, and so many of you are in this age category, I was horrified. I was like, wow, that is not good enough. You should not be marrying my friend. You should be 100% on her. Now I'm in my 40s, 80-20 is pretty good. That's pretty good. That's just an important life lesson about marriage. But if you can be 80-20 about things, that's pretty good. The problem is most of us don't put the numbers on. We all think it's all or nothing. But the reality is that we have a whole bunch of stuff outside of our control. Whole bunch of factors we can't control for are going to happen in our lives. We don't know what's going to happen. God's in control, we're not. And because of that, adding a probability is probably a good way to approach a decision, because then when it doesn't go well, or if it does, you can be like, well, it fell into this kind of, gives you feedback, helps you build a model for making decisions in the future. So if you can get some people around you to help, and I think it's really nice that he shared his probabilities with me, share your probabilities. Be like, okay, I mean, in terms of goodness about how I feel about that decision, given the unknowns here, 60-40, right? That's a good way to approach it. So if you can do that for each other, that would improve maybe some of the decision-making that happens. But while I was here, I got to spend time with a lot of good thinkers. I learned about Western civilization from Paul Michelson. I contemplated the similarities between C.S. Lewis and Freud with Dwight Brodingham in our capstone class. I thought about science and reason with Professor Hasker. So I got to see and hear from a lot of great thinkers while I was here. Take advantage of that. So those are my 4 recommendations, but here's the reason. This is the conclusion. So why? Why try to pursue accuracy? The point of pursuing accuracy is so that we can love people well. So we can't solve tough problems alone. We need to solve tough problems together, and we can't solve tough problems if we're trying to hijack the process and get to the right answer and be right. And we can't solve tough problems if our ego's so involved and we just want to feel good about ourselves that we can't look at things accurately. So if we want to be people who love the world well and solve the tough problems, which I hope that we all get to do, we're going to need to be a little bit less biased so that we can live well. When we look at one another, we need to be slower to judge, quicker to apologize, recognizing the similarity that we share. And to do that, we're going to have to be a little less biased. I was loved very well when I was here. Earlier this year when I gave a talk where I currently work, and I'm not going to name it again, it was already named once, and I know that it's not as, anyway. Dr. Lee, who was my professor here at Huntington, came to my talk, and afterwards we had the opportunity to have lunch, and I got to invite one of my students. And it really felt like we had come full circle, because I was watching my student look at my professor and just want to soak up the knowledge and the things that my professor had learned in the way that I had, and still do, look at him. And I felt the feeling of just wanting to learn, wanting to love each other well, and getting to see how that cycle continues. And so when I look at you, we don't know where you're going to go, what you're going to do, who you're going to influence, but I hope someday you get to have a full circle moment where you sit down with a mentor, and then you get to sit down with a mentee in one moment and feel that fullness of that circle. I don't remember everything we talked about, but I remember that it was a joy. And I think those verses that say God has blessed us to be a blessing, and to get to be a blessing is a profound joy. So I want to conclude by saying I really appreciate being asked to come tonight. Thank you for all the people that are here, that were here when I was here at the turn of the century. And thank you for providing the good conditions for good thinking. And I thank you for those of you who weren't here at the turn of the century for being the stewards of that legacy, for holding on to that for all of us so that we can continue to be the kind of people who can think well and think in a way that's less biased. So thank you so much for your attention. I know I talked fast, which didn't give you as much time to think. That's my normal speed. I wasn't that nervous. A little bit. Hi. All right.
Okay, my question is for the times in which we are living, and you're talking about how we need to love well and try to gather more information. What can you tell us about how to do those things in the middle of the time in which we're living right now?
So we live in a time right now where algorithms are sending us exactly what we want to read. And so you have to get out of the algorithm. So you should get books, is what I'm saying. You should get books. You should read alternative sources. You should talk to people who disagree with you. You have to mix up where you're getting your information. Otherwise, the internet knows what you like, and it's going to feed it to you. So And so I want to thank you for asking your question. Rebecca, could you pass this back to her?
When it comes to like ministering to people and trying to help them with being unbiased and their security in Christ, maybe they don't have a super secure faith. Like, what's the first step that you would take to ministering to them?
So I do think it goes back to the first question about I should repeat the question. She's asking if you're trying to minister to somebody who doesn't have a secure sense of identity, what would be the first thing that you might address? I think it is where they're getting their information from. Who are the people in their life? What are the messages that they're sending about identity? What are the information sources in their life? What are they saying about identity? And say, okay, we're going to need to counter message these. And so that's where spiritual disciplines, having good Christian friends, people praying for you, knowing that you have kind of a way to scaffold that identity, and trying to put those scaffolds in place. I don't know if I can do this. This might be really bad. Okay. Remember my athleticism. That was a bad idea.
Okay, I think we got a working mic right behind you.
Aaron, I listened to your podcast about social media and praying, and I wondered if you could just share that with the students here. I just thought it was really neat, and I wanted to
Sure.
have you share that.
I planted that. No, I didn't. But so I've been doing some work where we have students fast from social media for 6 weeks, and we try to replace it with prayer. So we're trying to counter condition what people's automatic thoughts are. And so if your automatic thoughts are social media, this was a way to say we're going to give it up for 6 weeks. And we had students replace the screen on their phones to be a prayer, and we had them get a prayer partner. We were their prayer coaches. We met with them at the 3 weeks and at the 6 weeks, and we measured things like depression, stress, anxiety, internet addiction, self-control, a whole host of measures. And what we found at the end was unbelievable. So I had, when we got together at the end of the study, students had to answer some questions that came up on the screen through Poll Everywhere. And when we asked them kind of what they learned, what God had done, when I tell the story, I say this was the most holy moment I'd ever had as a researcher, to see what God would do when people gave him their time. And so I did that once, and then we had to do it again, because once you find out that this has this effect, you need to do it again. And so we randomly assigned people to a condition where they had a 30-minute limit on their social media, or they had to completely delete it. And we did it again for 6 weeks. I asked some students that I got to meet with from Huntington before what they would predict. And you could predict this a lot of different directions. But what we actually found was it didn't make the 30-minute condition looked just like the full fast. So being intentional about your social media and replacing it with prayer. So if you can restrict to 30 minutes, and we had a special app that helped to restrict it, but restricting to 30 minutes has a huge impact on people's self-control, self-esteem, anxiety levels, stress levels, loneliness. People get less lonely when they start spending time with people instead of screens. Not that surprising, though.
All right, we've got a question over here.
Oh. I'll get you one later.
I was gonna ask kind of a question outside of like the unbiased self, but I was curious, like, what would you recommend? Like, what would be your advice on a college student who has a job? Like, how do you balance out college and work?
Oh, okay. I think just spending some time getting really intentional. And I would encourage you to think about who do you want to become and what's important to you so that you can make your life match your schedule. So sometimes it may mean, like, maybe the job thing, eventually you're going to be able to pay back your loans. And so it may make sense to say this job's actually impinging on who I'm trying to become right now. So that kind of thought about who am I becoming and how is my behavior impacting who I'm becoming. I hope that, I don't know if that's really helpful, but that's what I would say to that. Yeah, thanks.
I had a question, Dr. Devers.
Yes.
I really like what you said where right after you make that final drop off in the morning, you turn the meditation app. How important is it to find those extra spaces of time, especially with the question we just heard, people might have jobs in addition to studying. Yeah. How important is it to find those transition points that we can maximize being now or being mindful or being intentional?
Yeah, I think a lot of life is lived in these downtime moments, and our automatic response is to look at our phones, and we want our automatic response to be something holy, that we're inviting God into the space with us. And so trying to find, and it doesn't even have to be something like an app, it's the priming in your environment. So what are the words and messages on your computer screen? What are the words and messages in the artwork that you surround yourself with? What are the words and messages that you're frequently just exposing yourself to, and considering how those are contributing to opening these file folders and which file folders are getting opened. So for me, it's finding a way to put an app in that 10-minute moment. But there's other ways that you could think about, what am I doing in this transition, and what could I be thinking about and praying about? What's important to who I'm becoming, and how could I use the time that I have to do that? Yeah. But we all have limited time, right? So, but recognizing that you can build when you think about things that are awe-inspiring, you actually don't perceive it impacts the sense of a time famine. So most people operate under a sense of time famine. Awe actually reduces the time famine. So doing things that help reduce the time famine would actually be helpful, even though they don't give you more time. So if that helps.
So I heard you say earlier that you came up with a lot of, you started thinking about this when you were a college student.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about, how that developed as you were a college student, and what you were thinking about, why you started thinking about it this way? Because not very many people start thinking about things as a college student that turn into a book.
Yeah. Well, and, I didn't set out to write a book, so I'm not sure I don't think that's a necessary outcome. But I think I was asked the question by Dr. Lee and Dr. Priest to think about, what does it mean? Why would a Christian identity look any different than any other identity? What's different? What should be different? And so I think that just opening that idea, and what does it mean to think like a Christian, which is one of the questions that Blair Dowden asked us probably at the very first chapel that he spoke at when I was here. So that question, I think, opened up all the other questions, because when I went to graduate school and we started studying self-handicapping, which was one of these quick and dirty techniques to feel better, I was like, why do we need to do this? And it's not even very helpful. So it's like, why would humans engage in these kind of dumb behaviors? And I think the reason why is because we want to feel secure, and so we'll do things that don't even make complete sense to feel that sense of security. And I was like, oh, Christians ought to be different. So I think even that back then, right away when I transitioned from Huntington to graduate school, I was asking that question and thinking, wow, Christians ought to be different, because that was part of the training, to think about what separates, what would it mean to be Christian in an identity was a question that we were asking here. Yeah. So I think that's part of the class that I took here on integration of Christian faith, and I think those integrative classes are probably part of many of your disciplines, and so you're asking those questions, and I know that your faculty are asking those questions and want to engage in those questions, and so I think it's out of those questions that these ideas then became born. And I think all of us, this was an amazing gift for me to get to write this book, but I think there are lots of different ways that people get to share what their identity looks like in their profession.
How would you suggest building up habits without overwhelming yourself?
Yeah.
I know that can be hard for me, so.
Okay, I don't think you need every minute of your day scheduled so that you can maximize all the things. I'm not somebody who thinks that's part of it. But I do think going through seasons of saying, okay, I want to make sure that I'm spending time with the Lord, and where am I going to build that into my day? And then making sure that you build a few other activities around that. So for me, like, I get up, I do a few things. When I make coffee and when the coffee's done, that's when I go sit in this particular chair in this particular spot in my house. And I have the set of things that I'm going to be meditating on and reading in my journal. And then that just is built into the same spot in my day every day. And so it doesn't require a lot of thought because it's there. But I don't have, and then I have that. But I don't think we're not monks, and so we don't have this kind of nice schedule of like all of those things, but just a general sense of like what are a few really important things and ways of opening the most important file folders. What are a few things that you could be just putting in that pattern of what you do every day? I don't know if that's helpful, but I don't think it needs to be miles long. Yeah.
Another question over here.
Let's go. Hello. So you talked about the different biases, and the one that kind of caught my eye was the downward social comparisons.
Yes.
Do you think that they could be good tools for dealing with negative emotion? Like, do you think you could use your bias to help you in some different ways?
Yeah, that's a quick and dirty way to feel better, and I think sometimes you need a quick and dirty way to feel better. So that's a tool in the arsenal. I just don't think you should use it for that can't be all the time. It's like a dessert. You can use it every once in a while. The danger of downward social comparison is, especially if you're using another person as a downward social comparison, at least I'm not that guy, that's pretty dangerous because that's demeaning to somebody else. But if you can downward social comparison to yourself, like I'm better off now than I was last year, that's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that sometimes it's accurate because our mind may be telling us things are worse than they are, and so a downward social comparison can sometimes actually move you towards accuracy because one of the ones that I mentioned in the book is like times when I'm upset about something, and then I think to myself, oh, that's a first world problem, and that helps you realize like, okay, I'm getting upset about this, but this is totally not that important. Yeah. One of the other techniques for that is to think, is this going to be important 5 minutes from now, 5 weeks from now, 5 months from now, 5 years from now? And when you do that, you realize, oh, your problem is really small. And I think downward social comparison also works like that. It says, okay, my problem's not that big. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. And it's the furthest away person possible. I need the exercise.
Was there any research that you found that ended up being affirming to your faith? Like you started with the research and it kind of led you back to God instead of just moments that were like that?
I would say almost all of it does. So the answer to that is I find research to fit very well with my faith all the time. I think it helps me understand what it means to be human, and I think God designed us in a particular way. And so when you find out how God designs us, it makes me feel I don't see a conflict. I see worship. I think, oh, God made us beautifully designed, and yet also fallen, and that's reflected in the research that I do. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
All right. Could we get one more round of applause for Dr. Endeavor?
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time and attention tonight.
Wonderful presentation. I believe we're going to have the chapel thing come up at some point so people can get that. Otherwise, thank you all for coming. We're going to have our next Forrester lecture in February. So that is the end of the Forrester lecture circuit for this semester. Otherwise, thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time. Biceps up.